Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, the Jewish population in Israel continues to increase, and new statistics show that 46% of all the world's Jews are now living in the Promised Land. Professor Sergio Della Pergola from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem is a Jewish demographic expert. He found that on the eve of the Jewish New Year 5784, the number of Jews living in Israel and around the world increased. There are now 7.2 million Jews living in Israel and another 8.5 million Jews living outside of Israel, bringing the total population to 15.7 million Jews worldwide.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has banned 1/3 of United Nations inspectors from its nuclear sites. The hardline Shiite state has forbidden the International Atomic Energy Agency's most experienced scientists from performing their duties at its nuclear facilities. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the IAEA, expressed his dismay with Tehran's decision to discredit the inspectors. He said this is unprecedented and another step in the wrong direction, and he added that this constitutes an unnecessary blow to an already strained relationship between the IAEA and Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he's not surprised by Iran's behavior, which is further proof that it is violating all of its commitments to the international community and intends to arm itself with nuclear weapons.
The leaders of Saudi Arabia and Jordan have once again come out against Jewish visits to the Temple Mount. Despite its location in the heart of the land of Israel, Mount Moriah has been placed under the authority of the Islamic Waqf, which heavily restricts Jews and Christians from visiting the holy place and strictly forbids them from praying there. Jews and Christians have become more vocal in their demand for fair access to the Temple Mount, and more people of faith are visiting the site than ever before. So far this year, there have been more than 50,000 non-Muslim visitors to the Temple Mount. This show of faith has visibly shaken the Islamic authorities, who already are very wary of visitation to Mount Moriah, especially during the Jewish high holy days. They often attempt to incite the public to violence in order to further restrict non-Muslim access during these prophetic times.
The fanatic Islamic Republic of Iran, led by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has received $6 billion for the release of 5 American prisoners. Kidnapping Americans has proven to be a very lucrative venture for the radical Shiite regime. According to a report released by the Middle East Research Institute, Tehran has earned $15.7 billion in ransom payments for abducted Americans. When Islamic extremists took control of Iran back in 1979, a policy of aggression was directed toward U.S. citizens that included holding the staff of the American embassy hostage for 444 days. This latest ransom payment of $6 billion in frozen funds will provide the hardline Islamic Republic with much-needed relief from crippling sanctions imposed because of its rogue nuclear program.
The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization has attempted to nullify the Jewish historical connection to ancient Jericho by declaring it a World Heritage Site in Palestine. UNESCO is notorious for its anti-Israel measures and for denying the biblical and Jewish history of important sites in Israel, such as the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron. Professor Eugene Koncharovich, the director of international law at the Kohelet Policy Forum, declared that UNESCO's decision ethnically cleanses Jews from the history of ancient Jericho.
A group of 15 U.S. Democratic senators have written a letter urging President Joe Biden not to allow Israel to join the U.S. visa waiver program. Israelis are currently required to apply for a visa before traveling to the United States. It's a time-consuming process that Israel has tried for years to streamline by joining the visa waiver program. 40 other countries currently enjoy the benefits of this exemption, and Israel is anxiously waiting for acceptance. Knesset leaders are optimistic regarding Israel's inclusion, despite this last-ditch attempt by the left-wing Democratic senators to block the agreement.
A lawsuit has been filed against the second-largest school district in Orange County, California, alleging that it covertly approved and is currently teaching anti-Israel curriculum in public high schools. Several Jewish groups filed suit against Orange County's Santa Ana Unified School District in Superior Court, claiming that the material in question is biased against Jews in Israel and that it veers into anti-Semitism. The organizations say that the curriculum was approved without first disclosing it to the public, which the board is required to do by law. The lawsuit states that the new texts include one-sided anti-Israel creeds and propaganda. The texts falsely accuse Israel of ethnic cleansing and of carrying out unprovoked warfare against the Palestinians. The plaintiffs warned the new lessons are a direct assault on the Jewish community.
An Arab school that was teaching Israeli curriculum was set ablaze in the latest attempt at intimidating young Arabs from participating in Israeli society. The arson took place just days after armed Palestinian extremists opened fire on the educational facility. The Ilya School, located in Jerusalem, was preparing its students for the matriculation exams that qualify them for acceptance into Israeli universities. This program, adopted by several Arab high schools, has been met with hostility from militant Palestinians who view Israeli education as a threat to their national identity. They prefer to see Arab youth fight the Jewish state rather than live alongside Israelis in peace.
Israel's new National Library, located near the Knesset in Jerusalem, is slated to open this October. This massive 11-story building houses more than 4 million books, as well as photographs, newspapers, manuscripts, records, and millions of digitized documents. It is equipped with a massive auditorium, an education center, and a highly advanced digitized section that allows its users to rotate the bookshelves with the push of a button.
A delegation of 20 Israelis, many of them disabled IDF veterans, won 14 medals at the Invictus Games held in Düsseldorf, Germany. This is the first time the Jewish state was invited to take part in the international competition for wounded soldiers. The athletes were sponsored by Israel's Ministry of Defense and the Tzahal Disabled Veterans Organization. They competed in swimming, archery, table tennis, cycling, and indoor rowing events. The team took home 3 gold medals in addition to silver and bronze awards. Eden Kleiman, the chairman of the Tzahal Disabled Veterans Organization, said sports plays an important role in the rehabilitation of wounded veterans, and his team was proud to represent the Jewish state at this world-class event. Israel has been ranked the 11th most powerful nation in the world by U.S. News. Topping the list were the United States, China, Russia, Germany, and the United Kingdom. The article notes that the only Jewish nation in the world plays a large role in global affairs despite its small size. The rankings highlight Israel's parliamentary democracy, booming economy, as well as its strong military. And it also notes that Israel is highly developed in terms of life expectancy, education, and per capita income.
In archaeological news, the Israel Antiquities Authority has announced the discovery of several ancient Roman swords in Israel's Judean desert. Experts with the IAA believe that the 2,000-year-old weapons were taken as spoils by Jewish rebels fighting the Romans during the Bar Kokhba revolt. The artifacts were discovered in a cave in the En-Gedi Nature Reserve not far from Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. The IAA has been working to survey the caves in the area. It has conducted 24 comprehensive excavations of the caves in the past 6 years and has discovered hundreds of priceless artifacts.
The Jewish people will begin the observance of the Day of Atonement from sundown Sunday evening until after sunset on Monday. During this time, Jews will fast and pray for forgiveness from God as commanded in the book of Leviticus, chapter 16. Yom Kippur is the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. Jews afflict their souls by refraining from food and water and praying for deliverance. The days after Rosh Hashanah, leading up to Yom Kippur, are known as the Days of Awe, where the Jewish people recite special slichot prayers and request forgiveness for any wrongdoing from others, so that by the Day of Atonement they will be humbled when they ask God for forgiveness. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Yoram Ettinger. He's a former ambassador and specialist on demographics in the Middle East. Yoram, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
So tell our viewers a little about what you do when it comes to demographics here in the land of Israel.
Well, since 2004, I have established, along with a friend in the U.S., a team of 3 Americans, 6 Israelis, and we have decided to conduct due diligence on the Arab and Jewish numbers west of the Jordan River, and we have discovered great discrepancy to the tune of 1.5 million Arabs who are included in the number of West Bank or Judea Samaria Arabs, while they are not around. They are in the official numbers, which have never been audited by any Western country. And in fact, we are the first team to conduct that audit or due diligence.
Well, because of your work in Israel, we know about this, that the numbers are being inflated, showing that there are actually more Palestinians in the Judea and Samaria and Gaza. But why are they doing that? Why are they inflating the numbers?
They want to do away with the Jewish state. They want Jews to depart from the area, and they assume that the scare of the supposed Arab demographic time bomb will force Jewish emigration. The reality is not only isn't there an Arab demographic time bomb, not only there has been for the last 20 years dramatic westernization of Arab fertility and Arab demography, but at the same time we have experienced unprecedented Jewish demographic momentum. And maybe the best example to underscore that gap between myth and reality is that during the 1960s, there was a 6-birth gap between Arab fertility and Jewish fertility. By 2015, that gap disappeared with 3.11 per Jewish birth and Arab birth. Since 2015, Jewish fertility rate or number of births per woman has exceeded the Arab fertility rate. In fact, today, the Jewish fertility rate in Israel is higher than any Arab country other than one, in Iraq.
It's really unbelievable. I looked at the numbers that you were putting out, and it shows that not only is Jewish birth growing beyond anyone's imagination, we're actually the fastest growing population in the Western world. What do you attribute it to?
Well, there are few elements. First and foremost, the level of optimism among Jews in Israel, which is, if not the highest, among the highest in the world. And then comes the level of patriotism, the level of attachment to roots, the level of communal responsibility. And when you are optimistic and patriotic and you attach to your roots and you display communal responsibility, you want that to be sustained by producing more and more children. Unlike Europe, where there is pessimism, lack of patriotism, and therefore you can hardly see pregnant women on European streets.
You know what's actually very interesting is that there's a narrative that it's because we are more religious that we're actually having more children. Is that true? Is it actually like the religious community is having more children and no one else isn't, but they, make up the gap?
Well, the reality of the last 20 years is that while the ultra-Orthodox Jews have still by far the highest number of babies per woman, but the number has declined moderately due to growing integration by the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in the job market, increasingly also in academic studies. However, at the same time, we have seen unprecedented boom of secular, in fact, yuppie fertility in the Tel Aviv area. What used to be 1 or 2 among secular Jews now is 2 or 3, and in fact, increasingly 3 or 4.
You know, we see around the world that in the Western world there's a decline in births. You mentioned Europe, but also the United States, also in different Western countries like Canada, Australia. What can these countries learn from Israel?
Today in Israel, uniquely in the world, there is a direct correlation between the level of education, level of income, and level of fertility. Throughout the Western world, in fact, throughout the world, there is a negative correlation. The higher education, the higher the income, the lower the number of birth. Not in Israel, which once again is attributed to optimism and patriotism.
There are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
The message to the audience is, first of all, to pay attention to reality rather than misrepresentation, to pay attention to reality rather than oversimplification. The conventional wisdom is that Arabs are part of the third world and therefore produce more. In fact, Arabs are part of the third world, which is being westernized very rapidly. Jews are part of the Western world, and they maintain very particular Jewish-Israeli attitude and feature, first and foremost, optimism and patriotism.
Thank you, Yoram, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning into Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the truth from Zion.
Before the Ayatollahs and Islamic terror, Iran was a moderate country run by the Shah. He was a ruler that brought peace and prosperity to Iran and even made diplomatic relations with the State of Israel.
It reminds me of what happened over 2 millennia ago when Cyrus, the king of Persia, or modern-day Iran, decreed the right of Jews to return to Israel and rebuild their second temple in Jerusalem.
But who was the Shah? The Shah's name was Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was born in 1919 and died in 1980 at the age of 59, just 1 year after he was overthrown during the 1979 Iranian Revolution that changed the country and geopolitics. When the Shah ascended the throne in 1941, he led the nation through a period of rapid modernization known as the White Revolution. His ambitious reforms addressed a number of important socio-economic issues: property rights, women's rights, and access to education for rural residents. Under the rule of Pahlavi, Iran developed modern infrastructure and updated academic institutions, allowing women and other neglected groups to study. The Shah's Literacy Corps saw adult literacy rates more than double, and 4.5 million elementary school students learned to read for the first time. The Shah also opened a health corps, which resulted in people becoming more aware of their vitality. About 1 million families opened small businesses during this time, and suddenly Iran had a new booming middle class as the country grew economically and socially. Iran got new roadways, an air network, dams, irrigation systems. They were even able to eliminate malaria. These improvements elevated the nation and gave leaders a chance to do international commerce with more nations, establishing foreign policies with the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries as well. As Iran became a global exporter of petroleum, its working relationship with the United States and other world powers grew. However, the population at home began to suggest the Shah was pandering to the West, which many saw, and still see today, as being the antithesis to Islamic values and culture. Private citizens grew unhappy, and the country's clergy were even more unhappy, accusing the Shah of taking on a Western mentality and leaving behind its Persian culture and Islamic lifestyle. In the 1970s, the Shah had a secret police force that silenced those who opposed his ideas and his administration.
We turn to the Shah's secret police force, his FBI and CIA combined. They are called Savak, and they have a reputation for brutality.
Citizens' free speech was censored, and people also complained that despite an influx of money from the oil industry, the wealth was not being distributed or even kept within Iran. These sentiments led to the Islamic Revolution of 1979.
On his throne. Daily, it has become more difficult to look at the scope of opposition to the Shah of Iran and still see his monarchy surviving.
During this period of severe unrest, demonstrators took to the streets in mass protest, demanding political reforms and an end to the Shah's rule. Religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini orchestrated the revolution. He himself had been in exile for having previously opposed the Shah by leading resistance and protests. When he returned, he led a revolt that paved the way for the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran, fundamentally transforming the nation's political landscape into a totalitarian religious regime.
A tearful Shah of Iran left his country today on a vacation from which he may never return.
The Shah was exiled from Iran and was granted asylum by Egypt's President Anwar Sadat. The Shah only lived about a year in exile, dying from cancer in Cairo in 1980. Iran today is virtually unrecognizable from the time of the Shah. There's a lack of information coming out of Iran because Iranians are being routinely punished for criticizing the Islamic Republic. They are denied access to social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Decades after the exile of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he is still a symbol of better times in Iran. Millions of Iranian dissidents cling to the memory of this great ruler and hope that his son, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, will one day return to lead his people to freedom. And now, shining light from Israel.
The Dead Sea, 1,500 feet below sea level, is the lowest place on Earth. And located on its northeastern shores is the Second Temple period village of Qumran. Qumran was settled towards the end of the Second Temple period by a Jewish sect known as the Essenes. You see, towards the end of the Second Temple period, the Jewish people were very fractured. The Essenes, a radical fundamental group who believed in the imminent arrival of the Messiah, moved out of Jerusalem to the edge of the Judean desert. And it was here that they would establish their community. The Essenes went so far in their rejection of Jerusalem that they began to pray towards the east and the rising sun. However, one of the elements of Judaism that they held true to was the idea of spiritual purification in a ritual bath known as a mikvah. These ritual baths were fed with rainwater that were captured with an elaborate system of cisterns and aqueducts like the one you can see to the side of me. The ritual bath, known as a mikvah, played an integral role within the society here of Qumran. Every mikvah would be divided with a wall down the center. Those that were impure would descend on the right-hand side, immerse themselves in the purifying water, and ascend the other side purified. And this is the origins of the Christian tradition of baptism. However, the practice they will be most remembered for is writing the various books of the Bible on pieces of parchment, scrolls, that they would roll up and store for safekeeping in clay jars. Qumran would meet its demise in the year 68 CE by the hands of the Romans. But before they could destroy the city, the residents here took those sacred scrolls that they had written and they hid them in the caves that you can see behind me, as well as several more that speckle the cliffs that run along the shores of the Dead Sea. Now fast forward almost 1900 years. A Bedouin shepherd is here, allowing his flock to graze amongst the wild grass. He loses one of them, thinking that that goat had fled or ran into one of the caves up above. He picks up a rock, he throws it into the cave, but rather than hearing the sounds of his lost goat, he hears the shattering of clay pottery. Thinking he may have found diamonds, gold, treasures, he runs out with great excitement. But to his dismay, all he found was leather parchment with Hebrew writing on it. Unbeknownst to him, he had just discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. And those scrolls and various artifacts that were discovered here in Qumran are today on display at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And the amazing thing about seeing these scrolls is that when you compare them to the scrolls that are read every week in synagogues around the world, they are practically identical to one another, which means the Torah, the Bible that we read today is the same Torah, the same Bible we read over 2,000 years ago. Visitors to Qumran can hike up to the caves, explore the archaeology, and really connect to the history of the land. There's also a full-service restaurant here and a gift shop where one can purchase souvenirs from the region as well as Dead Sea products. On your next visit to the region of the Dead Sea, make sure to visit Israel's National Park of Qumran.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.